Okay, class, I'm going to continue on with this lecture where we left off before. So we have just left off talking about, and let me do a recap. We did our introduction, you did your attention-getting device, which was related to your central idea. Then you revealed who you were, as well as the purpose of this presentation, which is essentially your belief. And then you laid out your main idea statement, which is written right there on the sample format, and you're more than welcome to simply take that exact same wording and put in your own belief. And that's why I left a little line there. So something like, in order for you to understand how I believe that trust is the foundation to a great relationship, I will first tell you about my personal experience. I will second tell you about an expert who also agrees with this advice. And finally, I will tell you about an experience of an outsider named Sally, who also solidified that this belief is one that I should hold true. And then we went into our transition, and we said, so first, let me tell you a little bit about how my personal experience led me to the belief that you should always be truthful in relationships. Then I learned to develop and give an experience that I had, and then what I will do is I will tell that experience, and then I will give some information about it, and then I will remind you how that experience relates back to our central idea, or how that is the belief of yours. So the experience itself may not be clear on how that belief rose out of it. So your job is to make sense of telling us about that experience and then saying, so now if we look back to my belief of trust, you can see how through the experience that I had with this person led me to understand that being trustworthy and being a truthful person is always imperative to do in any type of relationship, or something to that extent. So really just drawing your audience back to understanding how that belief is clear through that evidence, and that's why you have come to believe what you do. Then you give another transition, getting ready to go into your next main point. So now that we've spoken a little bit about my personal experience, I'd next like to talk to you about the expert opinion that I found that helps me to solidify the idea that I believe what I believe. And then they go into that expert opinion. Again, you give the example of the expert, you give the study that they've done, and you suggest that that reinforces or reiterates this belief. And then you say, now that I told you about my personal experience as well as expert advice, I'd like to tell you a little bit about an outsider who also had a similar experience, who really reminds me that I should always put trust as my core belief. And then you can go on and tell about that person. And then finally wrap that up. So the next organizational element that I would like to go into is telling you a bit about the conclusion. If you can see there, there's a conclusion on your paper, and the conclusion for any public speech, and like I said a little bit in lecture, a conclusion's job is to wrap it up. This isn't like an English class where you're going to write out all this detail and information and think about like this existential experience in the world and how this topic relates or where we're going to go for the future from there. No, your job is to get in and get out. And a conclusion, all it is it's a summary of what you spoke about. So for each of you, you are going to start off with something called a signpost. So what's a signpost again? Remember, let the audience know what's coming up. And a signpost for a conclusion can be something like, in closing, to summarize, today I've spoken to you about. All of these indicate to the audience that we are drawing to a conclose. Often to use the words in conclusion is deemed as too obvious or something that's like frowned upon. I'm fine if you want to say in conclusion, that's fine by me, but if you can come up with a different wording that lets us know that we are drawing to a close, that is up to you as well. So you will simply use a signpost, and that's the first thing that you will do in your conclusion. The second thing that you will do is you will repeat that main idea statement. So you will remind your audience what you spoke about. So again, to conclude, I've spoken to you a little bit today about my own personal experience, an expert study done by UC Berkeley, and finally a story of a blogger named Joan. And I have shared all of you these different examples or these different main points because I hope that you can come to understand how I believe that, and then you give your belief one last time. So simply take what you did up at the top in the introduction with the main idea statement and reiterate it down at the bottom. And the last thing that we do is we like to tie in public speaking or in any type of situation everything up in a nice little bow and wrap it up in a package for us and draw it back to the beginning. We never want to leave our audience hanging in any way. So what we do with our last part of the conclusion is we refer back to our attention getter. Back to attention getter. So what do I know now at the end of my speech, or what does my audience know now at the end of my speech that they didn't know at the top or the beginning of this speech? But how has it come to be clear to them? So we can say something as simple, and if you remember the example I gave from class, you can say something as simple as, now think back to that time when you were hurt or when you were scorned. And don't think about it as a negative experience that is constantly going to hold you back. Instead, I hope that you can each take a page from my life and understand how the lesson of trust is something that can only propel us forward in our next interpersonal relationship. So you can say something like that. So it's like, how many of you have brothers and sisters? So like at the end, something like, so now knowing that we all share in a common bond of brother and sister experience, you can go back to that. It's like if you start with a sad story at the top. So little Timmy was blah, 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 and little Timmy did this and that. And then you'll end your presentation with, so think back to little Timmy and think of who will now see his graduation day, who will now potentially walk down the aisle with a soulmate, who will now be able to make the change that he wanted in the world, all because you donated blood, right? So we can take that story that we started off with at the beginning, and then we can leave it at the end. So hopefully this structure makes sense to you. And if you can get the structure down in your mind and you can start to build it into yourself without having to look like, oh, what comes next? I think it's a transition, or how do I say that transition? If it becomes natural and fluid to you, I guarantee you, you are going to be so set up for success in this class. So just understanding your introduction has those 3 points, then you have a transition, then you have a main idea, you give an example, you support it and show how it relates back to that central idea all over. And that central idea really should be the thing that guides, and we see we see has been equally linked throughout the entire part of your presentation. Now, in terms of public speaking exists with 2 areas of focus. And the first area of focus is the organization, which is on one hand. Well, once we learn how to organize, only half of our job is done. You can have the most dynamically written speech, and it can be wonderful, and it can be researched, and it can be written in a way that is magical and moving on paper. But that only works in a public discourse if your delivery is as equally dynamic to the writing that has been done. And that's where a lot of people fall short in their abilities, is because they don't put as much concentration on the delivery of that work. So delivery in this class is a component of many different things. But for the purpose of this speech, we are going to concentrate on only a couple of those elements. The first thing that I want to focus on is exactly what I'm doing here, and that's using our hands. And let me also say this. For our first speech, each of you will be utilizing a podium. And we have a podium in our classroom, and the podium obviously is one of those ones that can go up and down. But you'll note that if I keep my podium down here, and I am this tall, every time I look down at my paper, it is going to be so much more obvious than if I raise my podium about here, and now when I look down, I can do so just with my eyes. And if I step back even from said podium, now I almost don't have to look down at all. So it's a real easy way to cheat looking at your notes and glancing at what you need. So make sure that your podium is the appropriate height for you. I will help you with this on your first day. The other thing that the podium is there to do is to keep your notes. It is not, and let me put the podium up to where I need to be for my own height. The podium is there for you to put your notes on. It's not there for anything else. People oftentimes like to use a podium to do this on. But when I do this, it communicates to my audience non-verbally that I may be a little bit relaxed, that I maybe don't care, that I'm a little bit lazy. Also, it doesn't allow for any expression, and it just seems a bit weird. So never put your hands at the top of a podium, because that will make it much easier for you to lean. So instead, I always encourage students that if you need to do the death grip, let us put our hands on the side of the podium, because when you go to lean in, it becomes awkward. So that is an easy helper to keep your posture and to keep your body up. Once we understand that the podium is simply for putting our speaker's notes on, what I want you to do is then think about utilizing your hands beyond the death grip. Our hands, if we have full working use of them, are an extension of what we are saying. And when we naturally talk to people, we use our hands. When we are not extemporaneously speaking and we're holding on to this death grip, it becomes a bit awkward because nobody tells a story like this. Oh my goodness, I was so excited, and you'll never guess what happened to me. I could have died, right? If you were doing that, you would use your hands, and you would use your body, and you would use your face, and you would use everything into it. And that's what creates that natural expression between people. So if we are then using this podium in the same sense, you can, of course, I don't know why that just, oh, there we go. You can, of course, use the death grip, but there are ways to fake it out and make it seem as if we are naturally using our hands. So one of the first ways is to enumerate. You have 3 different main points in your presentation, so you can feel free to enumerate items with those. So you can say something like, so today I'm going to tell you first about a personal experience. Second, I'll tell you about an expert. And then finally, I'll tell you about a outsider named whatever. Right? So we've done it 3 ways. So first, let me tell you a little bit about so-and-so. And when I do those, and I'm so sorry, these text messages keep popping up, so I'm having a hard time. So cheeky. Hold on, everybody. Just hold, wait for it. Cancel. Maps. Why is maps popping up? Oh my gosh, y'all. All right. Hold on.